What is going on, Governors? Chisgule here, and today we are going to share wisdom from the Council of Kings. If you like Rise of Civilizations videos, wait a minute, Rise of Kingdoms videos, where we talk about in-depth strategy for how to be an awesome king or ruler of your kingdom, you should definitely like and subscribe because that's something we're going to cover here, and we are a sponsored creator with Rise of Kingdoms. With that said, what is the Council of Kings? A couple weeks ago, I had an interesting idea. What if, in my Discord, we collected a group of kings who could share with each other their wisdom, their ideas, their thoughts of having actually attempted to unify, destroy, or otherwise lead a kingdom? What if you could have a place where you could ask other verified kings for advice? Chatted a bit with my admin in Discord, LoJack, and he helped set up that room for me. So we've now got a space where verified kings only can chat and everybody else can see what's being said. The intent here is not to create an exclusive place, but instead to create a place where you, as a king of a kingdom, can ask for advice and get it from other people who have worn the crown. And my philosophy here is that if you have worn the crown at any time, you know its weight. So today we're going to talk about a number of king-related topics and kingdom topics, quite frankly, which should be super relevant going into KVK. I've got my notebook here full of things we're going to talk about. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that we had 17 kings participating in this dialogue. I expect many more will join. We'll have information about how to join at the end of the video, and the link is in the description to access my Discord channel. With that said, let's start with letting someone back into Zone 3 at the conclusion of a war. This is something super relevant in my kingdom, and I ask the kings, what do you think? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it should be allowed or not at all? And it was a totally mixed bag of responses. Some folks felt like, you know what? At the end of a war, let folks back in. Let folks back in, rebuild, get strong, KVK's coming, let it all be behind you. Other folks felt that that was an incredibly dangerous play, incredibly unsafe, and unwise. Where do I feel, or what do I feel about that? Man, I'm really torn. I'm torn because I'm a really forgive and forget kind of guy and kind of king, but not everybody is that way. So for now, we're just kind of waiting for more information on KVK, and we'll see how that ultimately evolves. Next question, kingdom buffs. Kingdom buffs are a very important part of growing a kingdom to be strong and powerful. There are a number of buffs that are available, including building speed, research speed, training speed, and resource production. When and why do you use those buffs? I asked the kings. Typically, of course, it makes sense to align with events. Something that hadn't occurred to me is to pop favorable weather during, for instance, a Cleopatra event that rewards you for production within your city, because that boosts the production by 20%. Now, each of these costs some number of gems. The gem cost ranges. The most expensive is troop training at a solid 2,500 gems. That said, if your kingdom is doing work during an event, it just gets tremendous value. And there is a 24-hour cooldown, or maybe it's a 20-hour cooldown on rocking these kingdom buffs. So you can only use them so frequently. So I asked the kings, do you use it only when there is a 15% rune on the ground? This is super relevant for the first 3 buffs on the left-hand side, less relevant for favorable weather. And I'm a king that tends to wait for only a 15% buff, and occasionally for an event like Mighty Governor, I'll make an exception, and, you know, we're in a troop training portion, we'll rock that on a 10% rune. Other folks only do 15% runes, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm personally steering very heavily towards using Mobilize for War very, very frequently, leading up to KVK. You might want to join Kingdom 51 to get strong. More about that in a different video. Okay, next up, should the king be rotated or not? This is something that I think is kind of a fascinating idea, where you've got a number of alliances whose flags touch the Lost Temple, and some period of time you rotate out which alliance is the king. Also, there's swapping kings within alliance. We'll talk about that in a second. The most compelling reason I heard for a king rotation is in the scenario where you've got several powerful alliances, and they speak very different languages. I was talking to one individual who's got a split with another alliance where they're primarily English speaking, and the other alliance is primarily um, Chinese as their primary language. And so they swap off who's king, which I think is a pretty cool idea. So where there's a language barrier, I think that actually makes a ton of sense to have a king rotation, and it's very trust building. That said, I think that if you have many kings in that rotation, there can be a lack of direction for the kingdom. Right? You've got a council, and I think a council is good, but there's flaws associated with that. Unity of vision, I think, can add some amount of strength to a kingdom's ability to grow. Next up is kill event rules, and let me tell you, we've got Mighty Governor Kill Event literally right around the corner. Kill Event is where, look, you get a ton of points battling other players. I swear I'm pushing the info button. I guess that's not firing up. Anyways, you can see, we're about to hit stage 5. That's Kill Event, 2 days of killing. A lot of different approaches for how to handle the kill event. Personally, we don't hit our allies or friends ever, even during the kill event, because it just creates drama, and we never want drama with our allies or friends. That said, I feel like I'm friends with just about everybody in the kingdom from an alliance standpoint, so that's a little weird, but we generally follow sort of a free-for-all approach with that modification that we personally are not hitting our allies. There's several variations of free-for-all for a kill event. One is no limits whatsoever. You can hit cities, you can hit players. The other is to hit only open field battles. Another variant that was talked about is that you hit only open field battles when someone is off of their own alliance territory, which is something that we tried once, which I thought was kind of interesting. This led to a bunch of complaints related to farmers who felt like they were wronged and blah, blah, blah. More interesting and unique approaches I've heard to Mighty Governor include doing a poll. They have the kingdom vote. What does the kingdom want to do? Slay or farm? If they want to farm, they farm. If they want to slay, they slay. I think that's kind of an interesting diplomatic approach. And another approach I've seen is to have special zones, which I thought was a cool topic of conversation. Within special zones, you battle, and with other zones, it's all off limits. Interesting approaches to handling the kingdom. Along those lines, there's a little bit of alliance management that I thought was kind of interesting, and teching up I thought was an interesting topic. When you build, that's not what I want to look at. What do I want to look at? Territory. When you build an alliance resource center for gold, a small portion of what's farmed there goes to your alliance storehouse. As you all know, gold is the critical factor for teching up your alliance, and with KVK around the corner, tech seems really, really important. What kind of tech is important? I think the emphasis needs to be likely in the war tree, where we know that all of those buffs should be relevant, and then also probably in the territory tree, assuming that we'll be building territory in KVK. That said, one alliance that is in an even younger kingdom than ours does 100% gold nodes, which I thought was really baffling. You can already see that, like, even with spending a bunch of money, we still have more gold than we know what to do with, which is kind of impressive. Apparently that changes when you have T5, but this alliance does all gold nodes all the time, and they have their tech maxed in a younger kingdom than ours, and that's very impressive. Moving on to the next topic that I thought was really interesting to hear from the other kings on is the distribution of trophies. Yes, every time the temple resets, there's a number of trophies that you can distribute. This is the gift category. You want to make sure to give those away every single reset of the temple. You can see here the numbers of each: 1 legendary, 2 epic, 5 elite, and 10 advanced. I personally use these primarily for diplomacy purposes, giving the lion's share away to other alliances, reserving only a handful for my own alliance and alliance members. That said, when you have a shared rotation of the temple, what's frequently done by those kings and kingdoms is that king gives them to their alliance when they're the active king, and they don't expect to get any when they're not the king. Other approaches I've seen vary based on whether or not the kingdom is at war. Kingdom that's at war distributes the trophies to protect its members within the alliance that owns the temple, and I thought that's a strategy that makes sense. The next really big king topic, and I think this is one that I have also struggled with is one in which you maintain absolute tight control over everything that happens in the kingdom, or if you're open-minded and allow people to sort of fight their own battles and decide things on their own. I fell somewhere kind of in the middle-ish, generally not trying to weigh in too much, although I was accused of being an absolute extreme control freak over everything that was happening in the kingdom. You know, kings get accused of all kinds of stuff, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. To give an example that's very, very specific, our allies in Faceless, before the huge war with Marvel, built a fort all the way down here because there were a bunch of these little altars that were not in use. And they said, oh yeah, we'll just build a fort and we'll go get some of those. The alliances on this side of the map felt that this was an extreme outrage, and they said they planned to get them eventually, and they were going to claim them even though they hadn't yet, or whatever the reasons were, right? And Marvel at the time weighed in heavily and said, you better back down, Chisgule. You stay out of this. And they were really like shoving on me to not get involved, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I turned to my allies and said, what do you want to do? I turned to my allies and said, what do you want to do? If you keep the fort here, if you keep building it, there will be a war. And we'll support you because you're our allies. Or you can head back to your land, and maybe this is not actually a thing that's worth warring over. Ultimately, they went back to their land. Later, it was a small incident that led to a major war. TMI, as you know from my videos, attacked this alliance Faceless. You can see this is their symbol here, @_plus. They were attacked, and the leader accused me of being a control freak over everything in the kingdom. And like, I don't know, we're not going to go immediately defend our allies? Like, you attacked our ally. Like, what was unclear? Like, it's in our alliance description. What's unclear about that? And Marvel sort of said, you stay out of it and we'll stay out of it, which is a weird thing. Anyways, we've seen how that war has been going so far. More video to follow. The finale's like on its way, and holy moly, the finale baby is nuts. More to follow. Absolute control, should you have it or not? I don't know. I've not been micromanaging every single shrine in the kingdom. I've not been micromanaging every single altar, every single holy site, and some people do. They are managing those holy sites to ensure that the top 5 alliances get every single type of holy site, and like, I think that's a very interesting strategy for consolidating power. Finally, final 2 topics, actually. I want to talk about kingdom titles and distribution of titles. We're going to talk about the positive titles, and we're going to talk about the negative titles. Most kingdoms have a system for distributing titles. It's the queen, general, prime minister, and king that can distribute the following titles to the kingdom: justice, duke, architect, and scientist, which we personally rotate around, and almost every other king I have talked to rotates these titles based on needs. Specifically, it's the architects and scientists that are getting rotated. We also happen to rotate the general for troop training. On the flip side, there are negative titles, and I generally am not a believer in negative titles. There's one player who no longer has a negative title, which is a little baffling to me, and I'm a little disappointed to have seen it removed, I guess. We'll talk about why that is in a second, and maybe, I don't know, actually things have been kind of fine with that player, so maybe this is all fine. Negative titles I generally don't like because it's super unfun to be on the receiving end of a negative title, especially when you look at something like the Fool, which is minus 5% building speed and research speed. If you want to get maximum value with debuffs like this, you need to leave it on the player and never take it off. If they can never get around the fact that they're always going to be slowed for building and research, I mean, you're basically crippling them, by the way. They are basically stuck. They can't save up their speed ups to get around it and then burst out a bunch of tech the second it's off. Like, you put these negative titles on, you leave them on, and you don't take them off to inflict maximum punishment, if you want to, on those players. That is particularly relevant for mostly just the Fool and the Sluggard, which is reducing troop training speed. Oh, so savage. That said, the way that other kingdoms are typically using this is when someone is breaking the spoken kingdom rules. In that case, they typically sort of put them in the penalty box. It's like one of those dunce hats that you basically wear for a week to try to give them a message around, like, hey, don't do that. I think that's kind of an interesting idea. One other topic that I guess I'll inject here, wherever here is, because I'm recording this before I figured that out, is whether or not the king should have an alt. Very important topic. Very important topic. I've got an alt that I use, and I'm actually about to use my alt for this reason. The general is a very powerful buff. Also, the building buffs, the science buffs, you really want to be able to receive those. And sometimes you either don't have a person you can trust to transfer that off to, or in the case of my kingdom, it's just so much easier for me to transfer it to my alt and then transfer it back to myself when I'm done with it. So what I like to do is I'll take a rune like this 10% training buff, I'll grab it with an army that goes out to gather runes, and what I'll do now is I'll go to my alliance, I'll go to my alt, Chisgule Mini, I'll upgrade it, make it the king, bada boom. Then I swap over to my alt, and I can give myself the general. Now, while I'm going about this process, I'm going to talk about some other things you can do with an alt as a king that is very, very important. Because if you're king, you probably have figured out that you are the one person on the kingdom, the single, only person in your kingdom who cannot use a peace shield. So if you needed the peace shield for an extended period of time, having an alt that you can boom, pop it off to, pop your shield, and then go like sleep or live life, I think is a very, very reasonable thing to do. We'll talk about farming alts in kind of a separate video, like how high level should they be, blah, blah, blah. In this case, we're just using it to hand off the general. Now I can swap back to my main and really power that up. But there's a couple other things you can do with an alt. Those include using your alt to gem the kingdom buffs. Now this is a really interesting idea because the 30-day gem supply is very, very cheap and efficient in terms of getting gems. But you can only buy one 30-day gem supply at a time. Any more 30-day gem supplies add on to the duration of the 30-day gem supply. So what I like to do is to gem out the buffs when I remember on my farming alt, who, if I needed to, I could put a 30-day gem supply on there for pretty cheap and supply the gems for those buffs to the kingdom without eating into the buffs eating into the gems that I could be using for things like the Mysterious Merchant, for things like wheel events, where I really want to have a ton of gems, like every gem I can possibly have for those sweet, sweet events. Pretty cool, huh? Last thing that I guess I want to talk about is toxicity, and a related topic to the negative titles. Kings do experience, and this would seem to be universal, toxicity and some amount of hate from some number of players. And man, perspectives, man. Everybody's got a different perspective on what is happening and why it's happening, and some people have partial information, and few people see the whole picture from everyone's perspective from the kingdom. What I'll point out is that some amount of toxicity seems to be commonplace in terms of hate toward a king, and like, if you're experiencing that as a king, I don't know, maybe you're not doing so poorly. I'm listening to the audiobook of Anthony Bourdain, who's a famous chef, and he talks about how he was being interviewed, #spoiler alert, for a chef position, and someone had called up, they'd heard he was going to be the chef potentially of this restaurant. They called up the owner of the restaurant and told the guy, like, you should not hire this chef. And like, so he pulls Anthony Bourdain in the room, the owner does, and says, like, hey, what's going on here? Anthony's freaking out that he's going to get fired, but ultimately the owner says, you must be pretty important to be hated by somebody so much that he'd try to totally tank your career prospects. So anyways, if you're receiving toxicity, it's common, and maybe it means you're doing something right, or maybe you're doing something terribly wrong. But if you want to find out, if you want to learn more, I invite you to join the Council of Kings. The link to my Discord's in the description. If you join, send a message to, I think it's @staff and also @me in my Discord channel with photos proving that you are, in fact, the king of your kingdom. I or my staff may follow up with you to verify, just get a little bit more information to confirm you are or have been a king of a kingdom. So that you can join in the conversation with other kings who are seeking advice and wisdom. With KVK around the corner, that seems like a thing that you really would want to invest in for the health of your kingdom, and I personally am getting a lot of value from those conversations. So my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do like and subscribe if you have, and until next time, my friends, you have fun smashing the kingdom.